Buyers get freaked out when they see the phrase as is or no disclosure. They feel like it's a huge risk. What's the seller hiding? It actually might be a great opportunity because those terms will keep a lot of potential buyers away. So less competition usually means a better deal. Many times it's just that the seller doesn't want to have to make any repairs. You can still go ahead and inspect, but don't expect them to fix anything. If there's a big issue, you can terminate. And even though they say that it's as is, you can still ask for a reduction in price or ask for closing costs in lieu of any repairs that you find. All they can say is no. Many times they'll make some concessions. So the answer is C. Sometimes sellers don't want to complete a property disclosure because maybe they've never lived there. Maybe it's an estate sale and they don't know the history. Usually foreclosures are the same. Banks don't provide a disclosure because they don't really have that information. But even when the seller does provide a property disclosure, don't trust it. Try to verify everything. In Georgia, the law is caveat emptor, or buyer beware. Most buyers and agents believe that it's some kind of legal requirement for the seller to fill out the standard 7-page realtor property disclosure. But I'm sorry, they're wrong. The only legal duty a seller has is to disclose hidden defects, legally referred to as latent defects. A latent defect is anything that a reasonable buyer couldn't discover by doing any type of inspection that a reasonable buyer could make. For example, if a seller knows that their property is really 10 feet short of the fence, they really don't have to disclose that because a reasonable buyer would be able to find that out by having a survey done. It's not a hidden defect. Same thing with a broken window. Anyone can see that the window is broken, so a seller doesn't have to state that the window is broken. Now I know that might not sound correct, but the Georgia Association of Realtors have proven me correct this year when they came out with a new short disclosure form for sellers who don't want to fill out the 7-page standard disclosure. I have it here. It is called the Seller's Disclosure of Latent Defects Exhibit. And I just want to read the first couple of lines here because it states pretty much what I just said. It says, Georgia law requires a seller to disclose latent defects of which the seller is aware and which could not be discovered by the buyer upon a reasonably careful inspection of the property. A latent defect in a property is a defect that is hidden. If a defect is obvious, it does not need to be disclosed. If a defect has been corrected, it is no longer a defect. So that's directly from the form there. So the seller's property disclosure that most agents have their sellers complete is a form that the Georgia Association of Realtors created that asks about many things other than just the latent defects, things that seem to be important to most buyers. The seller has to answer truthfully or they would be committing a fraud, which is something different than non-disclosure of a latent defect. But if it isn't completed or some questions are left blank, it's a red flag for the buyer to be careful, extra careful in their inspections. But that should be standard practice anyway. Also, a nice part of the disclosure is that it includes a list of items that the seller checks as those items that will remain. It removes any confusion. If it's checked, it stays. Now, what can you do if the seller lies or misrepresents things on the disclosure? Well, after the sale, if you could prove that they lied, you could take them to court and sue for damages. But it might be tough to prove whether or not the seller lied. So don't think that that is going to keep you safe. It's best to think of the disclosure as just being there to encourage everyone to be honest. Use it as a guide, but verify everything, if at all possible. If you discover some obvious misrepresentations, try to get clarifications. Maybe it was just an honest mistake, or maybe it is an indication that they aren't telling you the truth. If there's a HOA, it's also important to get the community association disclosure. You want to know what the annual fees are and whether there's an initiation fee. Get a copy of the covenants and restrictions. Suppose you have a work van or a boat and want to park it on the driveway. There might be restrictions on that. Are there any rental restrictions? Some HOAs don't even allow Airbnbs. During the due diligence period, you can call the HOA management directly and get that information from them. Bottom line, use the disclosures as a first step and a guide, but don't assume everything in there is correct. Always try to verify and confirm everything that might be important to your decision to buy. So if you do that, buying as is or without a property disclosure is the same thing as buying any other property.